Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and the title of today's presentation is Alien Zoos. This is kind of a companion piece to my last presentation, Extraterrestrial Gardeners, but this one involves animals instead of just plants. So yeah, this is about cases of people who have seen animals on board UFOs. And not just Earth animals, sometimes extraterrestrial animals. And I didn't find nearly as many cases as I thought. I found a lot of cases of mutilations. That's not what this video is about. This is about cases of people who have seen animals on board UFOs. But I found some other very interesting information about animals and UFOs in general. So let's just get started and see what we can find out about this very weird subject of alien zoos. First case I'd like to talk about comes from Barbara Lamb, who co-wrote a book with Nadine Lalick about the many people she's interviewed who have had onboard experiences. The case I want to cite is about a lady by the name of Jennifer, who had an onboard UFO experience and saw something very unusual on board the UFO. And I'll just quote Barbara Lamb and Nadine Lalick. They said that this lady, Jennifer, saw, and I'm quoting, row after row of large cages containing many different species of animals that she believed were not from Earth. These specimens, she was told, had been collected from different planets to be studied and tested, along with those that had been taken from Earth. In the event that relocation of life forms would become necessary in the future due to planetary changes, they were determining which species could survive on planets other than their place of origin. So yeah, there's that theme that comes up of upcoming Earth changes, and certainly it's not the only case that reflects that. But yeah, many people have seen animals on board UFOs, small animals and large animals. One case I have cited before is that of Carl Higdon. He's an oil field worker from Rawlins, Wyoming. On October 25th, 1974, he was out hunting elk and had actually spotted a group of about 5 elk and shot at one of them when his bullet got about halfway there and stopped and fell to the ground. At this point, Carl Higdon noticed a very strange-looking figure with straw-like hair, kind of weird appendages, holding a strange instrument. He walked up to Carl Higdon, gave him a little pill, which Carl obediently swallowed, he's not sure why, and then led him on board this very small, kind of rectangular-shaped craft, maybe 10, 20 feet wide. Once inside, Carl Higdon was surprised to see it was much larger on the inside than on the outside. And it's a long, involved case where he was apparently taken to another planet. He was sat in a chair and saw these really amazing things, really. He saw other people on board the UFO, but important here is he saw about 5 of the elk, apparently the same elk he had been hunting, but were now in glass enclosures, like cages, and were not moving. He saw other animals as well, and the ETs told him that these animals were needed for breeding purposes. So yeah, here we go. This is not necessarily mutilations. These are ETs who are actively collecting, studying, and breeding Earth animals. Another very interesting case is that of Denise and Burt Twiggs, who I quoted in my video on extraterrestrial gardeners, because they said that there is an area on board the ship that they were taken where animals and plants are being cared for. The Twiggs had a series of pretty scary abductions before their case evolved into sort of a more friendly contactee case, and they believe they were in touch with these ETs who are called the andromes. And so here are the Twiggs describing what they saw in terms of animals on board the, quote, mothership. So yeah, now I'm quoting Denise and Burt here. One interesting part of the mothership is the animal reserve. It is a veritable Noah's Ark. Lions, bears, wolves, birds, and elephants are to be found there. The majority of these animals are from Earth, although the andromes have also brought animals from their own and other planets. So here we have another case. Probably the ultimate case of this kind of alien zoos comes from a real estate broker by the name of Katerina. She wrote a book called Alien Jigsaw with a foreword by Bud Hopkins. It's a very interesting book. And yeah, she was taken on board a UFO in July of 1988, where she saw what appears to be a zoo. So I'll just quote her now. This is Katerina talking. This huge dark area we are in looks like a zoo, except instead of cages, they use big glass rooms. They look like displays. I can walk all the way around them. I see 2 gorilla-like beings and a large cat. The hairy beings are very tall, and they don't really look like gorillas, but they are all hairy. There is a cat on the other side of the room. It is white with orange spots and is about 2 to 3 feet tall. It must weigh over 50 pounds. I'm walking towards another glass enclosure. The animal in this one appears to be half lion and half reptile. It is lying on its back, and its mouth has fallen open because it is sleeping. I'm looking at its mouth, and I can see rows of teeth. I sense the animals have been saved from extinction. Someone next to me whispers, "That is something no one on Earth has ever seen before." I'm nodding in agreement. I'm amazed at what I'm looking at. These animals are incredible. I'm particularly intrigued by her description of a half lion, half reptile, because this is a mythological creature that's fairly well known. And I'm wondering if perhaps this mythology comes from actual cases of ETs perhaps manipulating animals in ancient history. Hard to say, but this is not her only experience involving animals on board UFOs. On another time, she says that she believes these are actual alien zoos. She doesn't believe these were screen memories or anything like that. As she says, yes, they were unusual, but I felt at that time and still believe today that these animals were very rare and were being saved from extinction. Another possibility would be to compare this area to one of our own zoos. It is also interesting that even today I remember the sex of the reptile lion was female. While I was in the dark and large zoo area, I did not see any aliens, but I was aware that they were monitoring us. On another occasion, she was taken to another sort of zoo-like area where they were keeping only birds. And here is what she said about that. They brought me to another place. I see cages with birds. The cages are about 8 feet square. This is like a zoo, except they have only birds. So there's another case. And one lady I interviewed, her name is Sue. She had a very interesting experience where she wasn't taken on board a UFO to see animals, but they took animals down to Earth to show her. She has had experiences her whole life. When she was a little girl, she had gray ETs coming to visit her. This was followed by repeated visitations by a short, dwarf-like entity covered in fur. It reminded her much of a humanoid cat. It had cat-like features, but was covered with dark fur, and it would speak telepathically with her and was kind of like her friend. She lived all alone on a farm and was disabled, so she wasn't able to get around a lot, didn't have any friends, and would be repeatedly visited by this cat-like entity whose name was Marie, M-R-E-E. And this entity came down and actually showed her various animals, which she said was from different planets. And I'll just quote Sue here. One was kind of like a Tylosaurus, but the face and everything, it had ears like a cat, and it was covered with fur like a cat, but it kind of looked like an Echolosaurus in a way, because it had those spiky things along its sides, and the tail with a little club on it. She said one looked like a cow, kind of like a hedriosaur, or a duck-billed dinosaur in a way. And she said there were horses with cat-like eyes, a leopard with a pouch. That's the kind of animals they looked like to me. She doesn't know what planet they came from, only that they were not from Earth, definitely. And some she was not allowed to approach too closely because they were dangerous. So I know how strange that sounds, but Daryl Sims, another UFO researcher, has said that he's uncovered similar cases of abductees who have seen dinosaur-like creatures on board UFOs. He doesn't cite any actual cases, and I really couldn't find any myself, other than the case I just told you. But it's a possibility that I certainly can't discount, because there are a growing number of cases in which people have seen animals on board UFOs. Here's a case which is pretty old, summer of 1948. I found this in Albert Rosali's book, The Humanoids Amongst Us. It's actually a series of books, very useful for UFO research. And he describes a pretty scary abduction case in which a person was taken on board a UFO. This occurred in Russia. And he'd seen this man with the initials VZ, saw this craft land. There were 3 tall, thin humanoids in silver suits who pulled him on board. And he was really surprised to see a large bear in a glass enclosure. And as he's being led through the craft, he saw that there were other humanoids put in glass enclosures. And they actually put him in a glass enclosure. He managed to speak with them and get himself and the other humans, most of them, released. One apparently not, which was a case involving vivisection and mutilation. So yeah, these sort of things do come up, and it's not always really friendly. The ETs may be saving these animals from extinction, but it's not always a friendly case, is how we would think of, a friendly case. But there are other cases. Alan Godfrey had a very well-known abduction. His abduction, I should say, became very well-known. It occurred on November 6th, 1957. He was called out to a herd of missing cows, which were not in the area where they were supposed to be, so that might be significant here. He ended up coming upon a landed UFO, or hovering right in the road in front of him. He had missing time. He was able to draw this craft. Didn't realize he had missing time until later, and went under hypnosis and recalled being taken on board. And while on board, he did see an animal. He was very surprised to see a large black dog. It's hard to say what exactly this means, if it was screen memory or symbolic. But yeah, he described seeing this dog on board a UFO. Really, the ultimate case of this kind comes from, no surprise, Betty Andreason, who on January 26, 1967, was taken on board a UFO. She's a very well-known abductee from Ashburnham, Massachusetts, whose case was investigated by Raymond Fowler. So in 1967, she was taken on board a UFO, physically examined, implanted, she thinks, but she was put into this kind of special chair-like device and transported to an area where she was led into a tunnel and saw a very strange landscape that looked very unfamiliar and kind of otherworldly, but was taken from there into a building or a room. And here it's really strange. She saw all these very strange, kind of 1 foot tall creatures, which she said looked kind of like lemurs or monkeys. And I'll just quote Betty. She says, "There's loads of them. Oh, they're scary. And they've skinny arms and legs and kind of a full body. And their eyes can move every which way, and they can climb just like monkeys. They can climb up quickly and swiftly, and down and around and in and out of the windows. They are all over the place. They are all around us, everywhere. They are all around, and they keep looking at us." Betty asked the ETs what these creatures were, but did not receive an answer. This was not her only experience involving strange animals or creatures on board UFOs. She had one experience in which she was placed in sort of a disc which filled with liquid and was transported to this weird underground area. And they're leading her through this underground area down this pathway where when she starts to see these large cube-like structures, which were clear, transparent, like crystal. And again, I'll just quote Betty when she says what she saw inside these cubicles. As Betty says, I'm just moving along beside those odd, I don't know, what would you call them? Icicles, square icicles or glass things. I don't know. And there's light there. There's people in there. There's people inside those things, inside those glass things, but they're not moving. She saw all different kinds of people in there, Native Americans, a person from Renaissance times. As she says, there's an Indian in there. There's a whole bunch of people in there. There's people there that are dressed funny and old-fashioned. I see Chinese and just all different peoples in there. And they're all frozen. There's even a dog and a cat and some animals too. But I can't see it all. And she was taken from this area into a forested area, and she saw that there were more of these animals which appeared to be like frozen. As she says, everything, it's just like clear glass, like a forest of clear glass. There's leaves and trees and grass and everything. And the birds, they're like thin, thin glass. The only thing, there's nothing moving. There's even birds flying, but they're not moving. And there's butterflies. Betty actually touched one of the butterflies, and it flew around for a second and then became still again. So it's not exactly clear what these are, if they're just representations or what. But it certainly does betray E.T.'s interest in animals. And as I said in my earlier video about extraterrestrial gardeners, she saw a whole forested area with a pond and little fish in it. So yeah, aliens are definitely collecting animals and taking them on board. While I couldn't find a whole lot of cases in which people actually saw animals on board UFOs, cases in which they collect animals were fairly common. One such case occurred on November 14th, 1954. This is in Isola, Italy. A local farmer watched a cigar-shaped craft land next to his farm. 3 small beings in diving suits got out and started to hover around his rabbit cages, surrounding his rabbit cages. He grabs his gun and wants to shoot them, but is unable to. His gun becomes too heavy to hold. And at this point, the beings grab his rabbits and get into the craft and take off. So other cases are very much like this. November 12th, 1955, Miss Long of Lynchburg, Ohio, pulled into her friend's driveway and saw this orange light, this orange object glowing right over her car. It frightened her pretty bad because her car lights were dimming. She screamed, and next thing she knows, her pet cat is gone. She had her pet cat in her car with her. It's now gone. The windows are the window is cracked open, but the cat could not have gotten out. So it looks as though this UFO abducted her cat. Another case occurred around the same time, October of 1955, also in Ohio. This is in the city of Greenfield. A farmer had a UFO land on his farm, and it took off, and after he examined the area and he was counting all his animals, he noticed one of his cows was missing. So yeah, they're definitely taking animals. Very famous case occurred on September 18th, 1962. This is in Barcelos, in Brazil. This was investigated by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. And this case actually made the newspaper because it followed on the heels of a pretty well-known abduction case. Following this abduction of Raimundo Mefra da Silva, this UFO was seen flying over the town by a bunch of people, including by a group of workers from a rubber tree plantation. And they started telling everyone about this UFO they saw, and they were actually jailed by the mayor of this town, who accused them of spreading rumors. And was not having it. It turned out, though, that a lot of other people had seen UFOs, so the corporal of the police squadron started interviewing people and found out that, yeah, a bunch of people had seen UFOs, and not only that, it appears that 17 chickens, 6 pigs, and 2 cows had disappeared from the area during this wave of sightings. The police officers speculates that perhaps the UFO had run out of supplies or food and was stealing these animals. Or perhaps they were studying them. Hard to say. But there are a lot of cases like this. Another occurred more recently on July 12th, 1999. This is also in Brazil, but in a very rural area, in a place called Acre, Brazil, in which a group of people saw a UFO described as very much like a small car, bright silver. It came down, hovered over the field, and it lifted up a pig. And this pig just flew up and inside this craft, which darted away. And I know how this sounds, yeah, when pigs fly. But this is apparently a serious case, and it was viewed by about 50 people, according to the local police commander. So yeah, absolutely a serious case. So yeah, as the cases mount, it becomes kind of undeniable that ETs are interested in animals. Another case comes from MUFON, was reported to MUFON by an anonymous gentleman. This occurred in March of 2018 in a rural area of Ohio. A man decided to go camping not far from his home. This was something he did periodically, and he said in this area there were a lot of stray cats, so he wasn't surprised when he saw some running across his campsite. But then he started hearing a strange noise, and so he looks over to where this cat had just run and saw something very strange. And I'll just quote the witness here. "I could make out the shape of plastic containers in a small circle that housed some of the cats. I then noticed 3 sets of pinkish orange glowing objects with slight movement. I first assumed the glowing objects were the reflection of the 3 cats' eyes, but after watching the objects further for about 30 seconds, I saw that the glowing was in fact some sort of eyewear worn by 3 human-like figures. As I knelt down to watch, I could see these figures were handling the cats, and the subjects were wearing a very low reflective off-white or gray coverall. After about 2 minutes, all 3 subjects turned their heads towards me. Thinking they might be animal control workers and not wanting to frighten them, I stood up and said, 'How y'all doing?' There was no vocal response, and all 3 began moving towards me, instantly closing the 30 feet that separated us. Slowly I spoke again, saying, 'What are you guys doing out here?' while they continued moving towards me. I heard them talking or communicating, but inside my head, and in a very strange whisper I couldn't understand. I also noticed they were shorter than me. I'm 5'10", and I'd guess they were 8 to 10 inches shorter than me. I turned and ran. Later he explored the area, the roads in this area, and could not find any vehicles, so clearly they weren't animal control officers. And yeah, he thinks they were ETs and ended up reporting this case to MUFON. So there are other cases in which, lots of cases in which animals have been taken. In 2011, the police in the Dyfed Powys area of Wales received a series of calls. One came from a gentleman who said he saw a sheep being abducted into a UFO in a field near the town of Lampeter, Wales. There are a number of cases in which ETs have tried unsuccessfully to abduct dogs. One occurred in 1957 on the heels of the Levelland, Texas sightings, November 1957. Everett Clark of Dante, Tennessee went outside to check on his dog Frisky and saw that there were 4 human figures, 2 males and 2 females, and one of the men was trying to take his dog, who was growling and trying to bite him. They eventually just went back into their craft and went away. On that very same day in Everettstown, New Jersey, John Trasco went outside around dusk to feed his dog and saw this object hovering in front of his barn. Out came these 3-foot-tall, pale-skinned beings with frog-like eyes. They were wearing green jumpsuits. His wife was watching from the window, by the way, had also saw this craft and the beings. And the beings spoke to Mr. John Trasco and said, "We are peaceful people. We only want your dog." Well, Trasco replied, "Get the hell out of here." And the being retreated to the craft. So yeah, ETs are apparently trying to abduct people's dogs, but not so successfully. Though there are a few cases where people have been abducted along with their pets. There's one case reported to MUFON of a gentleman who was taken on board a UFO, and the ETs were friendly enough, but his dog was very angry with the ETs and kept trying to bite them, and finally they just paralyzed him. And this gentleman said his dog, whose name was Hunterbone, just floated around the craft like a stuffed animal during the entire duration of his onboard experience, and finally was let go, and the paralysis was removed. I know of another case which occurred on March 2nd, 2006, in which a man was in his home. This is in Corn Creek, Nevada, and he had a UFO hovering overhead, and his dogs were acting up, and he went inside after the UFO left. But the next day, one of his dogs had a very strange injury, and he ended up taking the dog to the vet because it looked like a wound that had been cauterized, which was pretty inexplicable. And the vet was absolutely puzzled too. So it appears as if this guy's dog was in fact abducted. I know of another case which occurred on October 7th, 1989. This is in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. A young boy by the name of Rado was visited in his bedroom by 2 human-like beings who asked him to go with them on board their craft. Rado refused. He said, "I won't go unless I can bring my dog and cat with me, his pets." And they agreed, surprisingly enough. And Rado was taken on board this craft and shown a lot of different things. He may have been taken to another planet. It's a pretty long, involved experience. What's interesting is he was actually observed by his family as he came back into his room, just floated back in through the window. So it's got some pretty interesting outside observers there. I know of another case in which an abductee had a vision or a dreamlike vision, which she saw the koalas being rescued from the very devastating and recent wildfires that had swept across Australia. And yeah, killed an estimated millions of koalas, and hopefully some of them were saved from being killed by these UFOs. So that's encouraging, certainly. But not all these cases are friendly, as I mentioned. I mean, there was one kind of chilling case which occurred on February 25th, 1999 in the Cascade Mountains of Washington, in which a group of forestry workers were looking down upon a herd of elk and saw this UFO hovering over the herd, caused the herd to panic, and this UFO targeted one of the elk and lifted it up into the air and was sucking it up towards the craft. They didn't see it actually enter the craft because by this point the object had moved behind the trees. So this was a pretty well-known case, got a lot of attention, and there was an investigation. They did find an elk which had died of unknown causes. There were no broken bones or wounds that they could see, but they weren't able to determine if this was actually the elk that had been lifted up. So what actually happened, we don't know. It could have been taken or could have been dropped. Hard to say. Another case comes from Artie Six Killer Clark, who had interviewed a guy by the name of Kakoch. He was in a small village in the Yucatan Peninsula, in the Tulum area of the Yucatan. This occurred in 2010, and he was walking by a small lake when a UFO appeared. It was very low. It had a dome on top, metallic, and it was hovering over the lake as if looking for something, and to his surprise, he sees it pull up an alligator. And I'll just quote the witness here. Says the witness, "Suddenly the beam fell on an unsuspecting crocodile. It was resting near the bank. The beam lifted the crocodile upward and took it on board the UFO." According to the witness, the crocodile appeared to struggle, but was swooped up into the craft very quickly. 2 days later, he was walking by the same area when this UFO, apparently the same one, appeared and dumped the body of a crocodile back into the lake and took another crocodile. So, not a particularly pleasant case, but definitely they are taking animals. I know of another guy I interviewed. His case appears in my book, Onboard UFOs. His name is Andy. He had abduction experiences from his home in the Netherlands. And he said he had a really weird experience where 2 fish disappeared from his fish tank. And no, they weren't eaten by the other fish. They just disappeared. So very strange. ETs are definitely abducting people. Another kind of disturbing case comes from Grant Cameron. He wrote about it in his excellent book, Alien Bedtime Stories. And it involves this deer which was found on top of a telephone pole. Now, how the heck it got all the way up there is hard to say unless it was dropped, or maybe someone's playing a real sick joke. But yeah, this is apparently related to the mutilation phenomena, which again I don't really want to get too into, but it is related to this certainly. And there are lots of cases where cows have been taken on board, and ranchers have found their cows, the bodies of them, lodged in trees. So yeah, we know this does happen, and it's certainly pretty unfortunate. So yeah, not all these cases are super friendly. R.D. Six Killer Clark talks about a case in which a gentleman had his dog abducted, and while the dog was returned, it was returned without its voice box. The guy noticed his dog could no longer bark and took it to the vet. And the vet said, "Well, this is strange. The voice box has been surgically removed." And whoever did it did a really good job. But yeah, the dog owner was obviously not happy, and neither was the dog. So a lot of weird cases in which they definitely show interest in animals. One such case occurred at the Phoenix Zoo. And this is a very interesting case. The main witness is a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Sinnott, who had worked at the zoo for many years. This is a large zoo. It's got 124 acres that he's responsible for patrolling. And so he reported this case to Fate magazine. And I'll just quote Kenneth here. "I noticed an extremely bright light in the air directly above the lion and tiger exhibit. The light was oval and so bright it hurt my eyes to look at." So what he did is he called his partner on the radio and asked if his partner could see the strange light. And as Ken says, and I'm quoting again, "At that point, the light was moving over my truck. As the light passed over me, the truck's motor stopped and the lights went out. I sat motionless, more frightened than anything else. As soon as the light passed over the truck, the light and motor came back on. The UFO moved on, occasionally sending down a brief beam of blue light. Wherever the UFO went, the animals below would react by making sounds that were unusual for that time of night." So this craft eventually moved off, and after several minutes it disappeared. Turns out his partner had viewed the entire incident from the front gate of the Phoenix Zoo. So yeah, this has 2 witnesses who watched this UFO show a very unusual interest in the zoo. And yeah, it's a very strange case. And there may be other cases like it. I found one that may have taken place at Flushing Park in New York at a zoo there, but ended up not including the case because I'm not quite sure about the source. But another case occurred in November 30th, 1971. A lady was at the Plymouth Zoo in Devon, England, and was taking a picture of a giraffe. Did not see the UFO when they took the picture of the giraffe, but a UFO sure showed up in the picture. And I've just found that really interesting because it's not the only picture of a person who took a picture of a giraffe and a UFO showed up. There's actually another one, which I wasn't able to track down the actual source and location, but I did find the photograph, which is very strange. Maybe it's because giraffes are so tall, people are looking up. But it could be these UFOs are hovering over zoos more often than we think. So yeah, UFOs are all about animals, and I know animals can definitely sense UFOs before they come. There are literally hundreds of cases of dogs barking and farm animals going crazy when a UFO appears, and they can sense these things before the UFO actually becomes visible. So yeah, a lot of cases like that. I'd be here another hour if I were to talk about that, but I will quote one case which occurred in 1974 in the city of Ramona. This is north of San Diego, California. The Overfelt family was drawn outside by a bright object that had swooped out of the sky and landed on a hill near their home. It was about the size of a small house and was perfectly round and was changing in color from red to white. But while the craft was on the hill, the horses that they owned started bucking. The dog was slamming around in his doghouse. The goats were jumping up and down, and their cat ran into the side of the house, stunning itself. So yeah, UFOs can have a pretty severe effect on animals in terms of just sensing them. And here's one final case, which I think is very interesting. This was another case I investigated personally. I wrote about it in my book, Onboard UFO Encounters. This is the case of Lynette, and it's a very long and involved experience, but important here is what the ETs told her. They told her that they have been manipulating the genetics of humans for a very long time, but not only humans, animals too. They told her that they had been manipulating the genes of specifically dogs and cats to boost their emotional intelligence, to make them more able to interact with humans, which I find very interesting because, yeah, we are all about our pets, our dogs and our cats, and they do have very human-like emotions. So this could be because of the ETs. I mean, this is what they told her. So I don't know. These are strange cases. I did a whole study of these types of cases in my book, Not From Here, Volume 1. And I can tell you pretty definitively, pretty conclusively that yes, UFOs are collecting animals, and in some cases preserving them apparently from any dangers of extinction. Are genetically manipulating them probably, and of course there are an enormous number of animal mutilation cases. It's not just cattle, it's all types of animals, but I'm more encouraged by the cases in which the animals are treated kindly, as they deserve to be. So yeah, that's what this presentation is about. I think these cases are important because they show that not only are ETs interested in animals, but are studying them intently and maybe even genetically modifying them. It's also important because it shows that animals themselves are able to sense UFOs. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks once again for watching and keep having fun.